government influence?
Are you asking that question to me?
Don't mind who wants to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I think we cherish the editorial independence of the BBC. The Director General, obviously, is the Editor-in-Chief, and the Director General has to ensure, to the satisfaction of the board, and particularly the Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee, that the impartiality is maintained, and that the Director General, in overseeing the executive in how they function around the different programs, permits them to operate entirely free of inappropriate political influence.
And that image of political impartiality has come under criticism, particularly from Emily Maitlis recently, yes. And I'm sure you'd expect us to ask
yes.
questions about that.
Yes.
I mean, she's suggested that Sir Robbie Gibb is, who is very closely aligned with the Conservative and recently a government advisor in Number 10, has been influencing news output, and she was particularly critical of the response to her opening address at Newsnight when she criticised Dominic Cummings for his trip to Barnard Castle. I mean, did you think that that was impartial?
Well, I was at the McTaggart lecture, and so I found her lecture where she raised these issues extremely interesting, and she was addressing a very important issue, which was a global issue of how news can operate in an environment of heightened political tension. She obviously drew on certain issues related to the United States, and then she turned her comments to the BBC. It's worth saying, just so there's no misunderstanding, Tim was not Director General at that time. I was not the chair of the BBC at that time. But obviously, I'm familiar in detail with the processes. So I can say that while I thought the issues she raised were worthwhile and very good, she was completely wrong on saying the due process wasn't followed. I think probably, to my own mind, that reflected also the fact that I disagree with her view of impartiality, which may mean that she can lead with her own opinions and follow with the facts. The issues around why it was found both by us and then Ofcom subsequently that we had appropriately addressed the issue was because she led with her opinions. And as a great journalist, it wasn't that her instincts were wrong. The issue is how the BBC does what it does, which is we have to provide the facts in an impartial way to the audience and allow them to draw their own opinions.
Yeah, but she actually went slightly further than that, didn't she? Because what she was implying was that there was a change in the way that these things were dealt with, that it was normal for Number 10 to complain the following morning of something that's been... Excuse me, I'll just finish my point, and then you can comment on it. But that it was normal to receive calls of that nature, and that this wasn't dealt with in that normal way, and she implied that that was political interference. As someone with a clear political affiliation on the board who stepped in and reacted in the way that it was not due process, in the way that things have been dealt with previously.
You're conflating 2 points she made, which were separate, by the way, just to be clear. So what she did say is that she felt it was dealt with inappropriately in terms of the process and the response to Number 10. She wasn't saying that came from the board. She was sort of talking about the BBC and its response.
Well, actually, no, she did. She did, didn't she?
But I thought she was
named Mr. Gibb.
Hold on, I think if I may, yes. we're entangling two things here, if I may. So Robbie Gibb was not around at the time. So there are different concerns here. There's one concern, which, if I may, is been around a while, which is political interference on the BBC board, how that works, our entanglement with government, both on funding and editorially. And there's the process by which the Newsnight decision was made and whether we were right. Yeah? So they're linked thematically, but in terms of the actual events, they are different. In terms of Newsnight, the BBC is clear. It stands by the decision it made. By the way, I was not Director General at the time, but I think it's absolutely the right decision, unequivocally. As Richard said, our view is impartiality is not just to be able to speak truth to power, but it's to do it in a way where you do it by showing a balance of opinion. You don't offer categoric opinion in that way at the top of an item. That, in my view, we were in the wrong place. Now, Emily's an outstanding journalist. I respect her opinion, but we disagree on this. Now, the other thing I would say is it is fairly normal. I'm sure this committee is wise enough to know that the BBC gets quite a lot of the gift of feedback on a regular basis from high-level offices from high-level politicians on an almost daily basis. I can categorically tell you that anyone that thinks that by taking a call from one of the officers leaves us to run in a panic and go, we need to change something. We reflect on it, we think about it. When we need to correct, there's a question about the speed of correction. We do correct quickly. In fact, I'm often sitting here saying, explaining why it took so long to fix something. Even under my tenure, if something goes wrong, when we put we don't properly explain the background of a lawyer or an error or whatever, we correct immediately. That's what this case was. If you look through it in detail, which I have, there was a proper discussion at the BBC and the call was made. And I'm very sorry that we're in a different position to Emily, but that's where we are and that's what happened. I think you've got another question, which is influence on the board, which, as I say, is one that we've been here before, but I think that's, and the chair can speak to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the last question really is, you've answered the points, but this issue about political influence, the answer has come back here many times. Labour, when they were in government, they appointed John Burt, and he was close to people in the Labour Party, and I get all that. But there is a consistency in the appointments. Certainly, the ones that come before us on this committee, that there are a certain type of person with a certain political affiliations in their background. It just seems to be happening on an industrial scale, and there do seem to be a high proportion of people with association with the Conservative Party currently in senior positions in the BBC on the board.
Well, if I may say, I'd ask you to examine the board members and the recent appointments in more detail than I believe you may have done. Because if you look at the most recent appointments, you'll see we've had Muriel Gray, we've had Robbie Gibb, we've had Damon Buffini, we've had Shamit Banerjee. I don't think you can characterise that group as all of one type.
Okay. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, welcome everybody. Nice to see you again. So Mr. Sharp, you said on impartiality we're going to continue, but broaden it out now. Our reputation for impartiality needs to be earned each and every day. Tim, you said our first priority, your first priority, therefore, because you're the DG, is impartiality and trust. You must take an assertive approach to impartiality. In October, so next month, it will be a year since you published the Impartiality Action Plan. Could you update the committee on, and the viewers, how you think that's going? And I'm particularly interested in because this is your priority, your first priority, what are you doing personally on a day-to-day basis to drive that forward?
So I think we're making good progress on there's two things here. One is that sit underneath the numbers, by the way. I'm quite focused on how we're actually doing in terms of how the public perceive the BBC, because there's all kinds of noise around us. Actually, if you look at it, we have, who would you turn to most to news you would trust? 48% to the BBC, nearest competitor 8%. Numbers are basically flat. Okay, so I'm not claiming we're seeing soaring numbers on impartiality, but broadly we're holding our numbers flat. They're massively under pressure. Every public institution, by the way, is suffering from trust, what social media brings. I think this committee should be looking and worried at some of the bigger global data. 73% of the world doesn't have a free press now. Yeah, 22% of the world, according to the Financial Times, now has a democracy that's functioning freely. All these things are really critical. Overall, I think we're doing a pretty good job. We're holding our numbers about flat in the midst of all kinds of storms, views, tweets, all of that going on. The BBC numbers are solid. In terms of what we're doing, there are two things. There's the action plans, which I think is
the Sirota review,
which is Sirota review, the very specific things, whether it's, and I could list them, but all the programmed, the thematic review, which I think is really interesting in terms of how we deal with the subject of taxation and public spending, the internal reviews that we're undergoing, the training that we put thousands of people through training in terms of impartiality. And this is not just teaching them to suck eggs. This is also some of the dilemmas that you get when you're in the world of social media. This is a skill. Impartiality needs to be learnt, and it's not easy, and it's a choice that's going to be wrestled with forever by people like myself. In terms of personally, how do I set the culture in the BBC with my leadership team. So I think one of the biggest challenges, obviously you've got the technical bits that we're doing, and I think we're making good progress. It's the quality of conversation after a programme closes. So if you're the editor of the Today programme, who's outstanding, what's the quality of the conversation? How are we talking about what issues we've covered? How do we discuss from every point of view? There's no assumed position. And I think part of my job is to get, which I do, speak to teams, to editors, to make sure that conversation is really deploy it into the BBC and the guts of the BBC, so that you are, the reality of the BBC is often, the editor of a particular programme and that discussion. I think my biggest role is to make sure that the clarity of expectation around that is unequivocal and people understand it.
Do you get down, sleeves rolled up, into the Today newsroom and have a conversation?
Now and again, but in my job,
I get it.
Now and again, and I think you need to be visible. I was on the news floor, last week, etc., etc. But that can only go so far. The key thing you've got to do, and I think we've got an outstanding set of people in the BBC, but you keep working with the BBC is a model where if you're running, Radio Stoke, or you have editorial power in that, and it's actually building the capabilities of those individuals, making sure we've got the right people in place. And I think that's the job I've got to do, is make sure we've got the right leaders in place. Of course, we had a very big public appointment yesterday. Deborah Turness arrived as Director of News. So that's the job I've also got to do, is choose outstanding people and make sure they deliver.
What conversation have you had with her about this?
Numerous. I mean hours of it, because it's actually central to the BBC in terms of, and hopefully you'll see some of the. I won't speak for Deborah, but I think she absolutely will lay out very clearly that going after building journalism that's verified, that's trusted, that is impartial, is absolutely central. And when I hired that job, and it won't be a surprise to you, it was someone who saw that as a real opportunity. For what it's worth, I think the challenge for us is to not make it a defensive posture, which in my job can often be quite a challenge based on the amount of noise. But is actually, I think there's a real growth opportunity around the world. I mean, if you look at the US, we're the most trusted news source. You look at, we're growing internationally. So I think there's a real opportunity for impartial journalism.
How would you describe your new head of news? How would you describe her background if you were just writing a top line of a press release?
Outstanding editorial, it's as simple as that.
Where does she come from? Where's her hinterland?
Sorry, where does she come from?
Where's her hinterland? Where does she come from? What's her background?
Well, she comes from, she's got an unparalleled experience of news operations around the world, and in the US and the UK. So she's just got a fantastic CV on that.
You mentioned Radio Stoke. Do you think the BBC has a problem with impartiality at core, as in network news and in national output, as well as in local output? Where does the balance of complaint on impartiality fall?
I'm not sure it's right to judge it by the balance of complaint, but we can debate that one. I think just to be clear, I don't think the BBC had a major problem on impartiality. It had a major challenge, which is in a world where, if you go to America now, you will not find you'll be hard pushed to find. I don't want to criticise anyone, but you can see the polarisation of the media market. I note in India, NDTV, an independent provider, has just been bought by a billionaire with interests around the world. I can't say, and this is why we get, I think, focused a little bit too on the big picture is we are seeing media operations failing to sustain an impartial position through the culture wars, through all the things that are going. There's loads of evidence of this around the world.
See, I hear you, Tim, but we are the Culture Committee of the UK Parliament. We're interested in the BBC. We're interested in the media landscape here. I'm not interested in us being judged against the US that doesn't have a state public sector broadcast.
The issue, if I may, the issue is where do we trend if you don't take action? And the evidence around the world. I totally agree with you. I'm worried about it. I cared enormously about democracy here and free media and how that works. Is if you look at the direction of travel, if you don't intervene, it doesn't look good. And I think we've been active in intervening, and that will be a battle, but the numbers suggest we're doing pretty well.
And I would agree. I just want to give you some examples, because obviously I said it's a year next month, and you will be judged on action, I guess, on this, and you are conducting these individual programme content reviews, so I'm interested in exploring them a little bit. Just give you some examples. So a couple of notes that I've made over the last year or so. A presenter described J.K. Rowling as holding a, quotes, very unpopular opinion on gender identity, discussing her in the same context as Hitler and R. Kelly during an edition of Front Row. Tom Sutcliffe asked a guest on the programme, do you think there's a major philosophical distinction between artists who have committed crimes, have been found guilty of crimes, and artists who have simply unpopular opinions? You bring up the case of J.K. Rowling, who clearly has a very unpopular opinion regarding gender identity and has a consequence of that face severe and serious criticism. Well, her opinions are unpopular in Tom's opinion, but there are many people who would take a different view. BBC News have been criticised this summer, right at the end of the session, about a report on BBC, on NHS pay, where Debbie Wilkinson, a well-known Jeremy Corbyn supporting union rep, spoken at Labour conference, so not exactly a shrinking violet, was introduced as Debbie from West Yorkshire, who's been a paramedic for 30 years, and then laid into the government on NHS pay. EastEnders, one of my favourite shows. This is a bit of a get out of my pub moment. Brexit was likened to COVID. After being shown chucking a glass of water into Sam Mitchell's face, Sharon Watts aggressively told her, "We've had Brexit and COVID, we don't need you here." And then Laura Koonsberg, bringing us right up to date on Sunday. So Laura, who is a fantastic journalist, and I would say fairly unimpeachable on impartiality, actually, in knowing her, watching her and knowing her personally.
Agreed.
But I would say that her show got off to a challenging start in terms of major appeal outside of SW1 and on this whole issue of impartiality by the Joe Lycett debacle, where he was asked on as a pundit. He did this mock applause after Liz Truss left the interview chair, was then immediately asked for his reaction, and he said she was the dregs of what they've got available and the backwash of the available MPs. Now, whatever your opinion, my colleagues around this table, whatever my opinion of people in my party, not really relevant. But for a brand new show, which really wants to get off to a good start, when you're booking a pundit to go on, Joe Lycett is not an uncontroversial figure. You talk about the conversations that go on after output. How about a conversation that goes on before output, where somebody says, you know what, new show, new start, new term, let's not book Joe, because we know what Joe's going to deliver. You see, somebody who's ungenerous to the BBC could say, you know exactly what Joe was going to deliver, and that's why you booked him. So those examples, there's some horror stories in them. I could go on. I mean, you've got Gary Lineker. He's still tweeting that the government are voting to pour raw sewage into our waterways. You and I have talked personally in this session about Gary Lineker before. You told me that you were calling him to check for his tweets. I care what he thinks about Spurs' attempt to win the Premier League. It's going very well, I might add. Not what he thinks about water quality. That's not why you pay him. So these individual programme content reviews, in the context of some of those examples that I've just given, what are the yardsticks against which you're judging success? Because many would take those examples I've just given and say, you've got a lot of work to do.
We've always got work to do.
Not just across news. I mean, the EastEnders is not news, is it?
I was going to say that because I think there are, if I may, very different. Each of those instances is different in themselves, by the way. Yeah. Very different. No, they're different editorially. I think that's really important.
Because they're across the output.
And they're interesting, but they have different. I have different views on them. So I think that where in a news output or we're doing a journalist is giving a view where they've assumed a position, there's a problem. By the way, we do have hundreds of thousands of hours output, I will give you that sentence, and overall I think we are delivering well, by the way. I do think that, and I think we need to be, it's important that we're proportional about this, but there are instances where, and of course you're going to, in my job, get things where you go, well, that sentence wasn't delivered right. Yeah? I think in drama it is a real kind of question on that, because I think characters offering, that's not, Sharon is not the views of the BBC, by the way. We can debate that at length, but I think that, and it's important that you get drama from different perspectives, different writers, all of that. But I don't think it depends on the context of that view and how it's offered. I don't think that. I think that is a different example. With regard to Laura, I mean, Laura is exceptional. I think we can debate the merits of that particular booking. I don't think it displays BBC bias in the slightest. The audience saw it for what it was, by the way. I mean, I think to date, I just looked at it, I think yesterday, by yesterday with the front page and the headline, we had 28 complaints. I think we're up to 66 complaints. They saw what it was. It was bemusing. We can debate exactly in the way you debated about,
why go there?
Whether it's the right booking. What I would say is Laura conducted herself as the BBC host, I thought, in exemplary fashion, in a slightly difficult situation. We move on, but it doesn't. I mean, the idea that displays bias. Now, I think there are examples within what you said where you do say, okay, and this is where it gets, in fact, for me, more interesting. So when we look at the reviews we're going to do, breakfast, country file, English language, morning radio news programmes, the real things I'm interested in, those things I think you've got to sanction or not, or take action, Lineker included, in terms of, and I think we can debate that in a minute. I don't quite think he criticised the government in that way, but I think he has to absolutely be within, and I've talked to Gary. I think he was doing thousands of tweets, and I think overall the behaviour, in terms of where he is, I think he's in a lot better state. He is not at the standard of a news and journalist. He shouldn't be a news and current affairs executive. But overall, I think that conversation goes on. I'm very supportive of Gary. I think he's a brilliant presenter. And I think it is work in progress in terms of where he draws the line. But we've had a good conversation. I think he understands the guidelines. But I'm not...
When you had that conversation, does he say, okay, yeah, let's do this then, Tim, let's go through this, let's tick this box? Or does he sort of say, yeah, I've screwed up again? I mean, we're paying Gary £1.35 million. I mean, he's down 10 grand on last year, but I'm sure he'll get by when his energy bill comes in. But, I mean, we're paying him 1.35 million quid, and he's a brilliant pundit on football.
He is, yeah.
And he's entertaining.
He is.
I don't care what he thinks about water quality. Why should we be paying him? My constituents are taxed through the licence fee. They don't pay it, they go to prison for somebody to give their opinion on water quality.
Well, with respect, you're not paying him to
but he's doing
tweet. And I think he is, my view is that overall, if you look in the round, I think people are smart enough to see look at this sensibly. I think Gary and I have had conversation that says, and I think he's seen a massive improvement to where he was a few years ago in terms of his entry into party politics. I think that banning people completely from getting to any issues-based tweeting is probably the wrong position to do, but there's a standard there. We talk about it. I'm very supportive of him. Now, going back to if I may, on the reviews, because that's
the reviews. Yes.
That's what
are the yardsticks?
We're looking at BBC. We're looking at BBC Breakfast, Country File. I'll give you where I'm interested. Really, I mean, there's the cases you've made, but actually, I think some of this is deeper, which is what's the question? What topics topic choice? What questions are we asking? What's the level of interrogation, fact-based analysis, verification? So if you take things like breakfast, or you take things, and this is supportive to the programme teams, this is with them, saying, okay, if you take Country File, rural affairs is a live issue for us all, yeah? How are we representing that? Are we properly representing some of those issues? Are we featuring the right topics? They're the things I'm interested in. The programme review will, in a very quantitative and qualitative way, but quantitative way, look at how that is being done. And our teams will assess that, discuss with teams, and the idea is solely to improve the output for the audience. That's it.
Mm. And just finally on the news, some of the guests that come on news, I gave that example that's caused a bit of excitement about the opposition activist who was just introduced as Debbie from West Yorkshire. I mean, should researchers be asking guests when they're booking them for... Let's draw back the cover here. So what happens is, for those listening, is that politicians get a phone call from a journalist, and they say, or a text, would you come on The World at 1? You reply and go, yeah, I could do that today. Can we have a chat? We then have a chat. If you say what they think will fit into the programme, then they book you. If you don't say what they think will fit into the programme, they say, I've spoken to my editor and we can't slot you in today. So I sometimes think it would be great to say completely the opposite on the phone call and then the opposite when I'm on air, but I haven't done that yet. Probably never going to work now. But should researchers be asking when they book somebody for what is a very obviously sensitive political story if they have any active political affiliations?
I think they should always be doing the due diligence on appropriate background. That's, I mean, and where we've corrected, I mean, like, you know, where we've made mistakes, like putting Alan Dershowitz up to talk about Epstein without giving full background, you know, these are things where my view is that's proper verification. Now, it is contextual, so you don't have to do full background on everything for every, but appropriate contextualisation of what background is relevant is critical, and we've been open about that, and sometimes we don't get it right.
I could suggest when you're doing these reviews, you could
absolutely right. That's part. But with respect, that's one of 30 or 40 questions you'd have, which is guest selection, range of guest selection, what voices you're putting on air. Are you presenting them in the right way? Are you asking the right question? I mean, as I could go on and on, but that's what the reviews will do. But they are meant to, you know, they are constructive. I mean, a programme like Countryfile is a national asset, and I love Countryfile. But it's super. But that's not. We can look to keep improving that.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, thank you for what you've said. I would agree the BBC are moving in the right direction. There are clearly, you know, like any newspaper will tell any of my colleagues here, as they get complaints from one party and complaints from the other, and they probably think they're in a
we've got
right
work
place.
to do.
And you have exactly the same thing. But you know, for something that is your first priority, you know, we've spent quite a lot of time talking about it in this session, but you're the Director General, you said it's your first priority, therefore it's obviously something that you think is important to how the BBC can go forward as that trusted broadcaster that needs to earn that reputation each and every day. So I just hope that we can continue the conversation and hear more about these individual reviews. And just finally, will you publish the methodology that you're working around these individual reviews with programmes? Because otherwise, how do we have any transparency to that?
We can provide you with something on that. Let me just take that away.
I think that would be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, DG.
Can I just add into the mix there that when you're reviewing breakfast, which I watch every morning, I have the radio on in the kitchen and the TV on in the living room. But it happened again this morning. I mean, it's a big day in politics today. There was a change of Prime Minister. Huge day, whatever your politics are. But the royal correspondent factually describing what was happening got it wrong, and that happens quite frequently where they're describing a political process and they get it wrong. What do you actually do to make sure that a process that is happening, whether it's something in Parliament happening, that they're actually getting it right? Because the viewership of breakfast television is a different viewership than, say, the Laura Koonsberg show or Newsnight.
Of course.
What do you do to make sure that people understand what they're talking about?
We do a vast amount of due diligence, and we have our editorial policy department, political advisor, all those things that can be consulted to get to the question. And you know, across the thousands of hours output, I think we do a good job on that. Very specifically, if you've got I want to know what it is, because you know, knowing the editor of Breakfast well, he'll take that on board. And I would say that the one thing I think the BBC should do is listen. And if we're not going to get everything right every time, but let's hear it.
It happens quite frequently where, you know, obviously as a politician I'm a bit of a geek on process in politics. I'd love
to hear it. So right. Please give me the feedback. That's great.
And I would rather it was right.
With your indulgence, it might just be, while we're just touching on breakfast, just give you a chance to make a comment about Bill Turnbull, who you lost last week, which I heard your tribute to him, but having been interviewed by him, as I'm sure many of my colleagues have, you lost a first-rate journalist there, didn't you?
Absolute first-rate journalist, and there are very, very few people who can do what I think is one of the toughest things to do in our industry, which is move from the lightest of subjects to the hardest of topics and connect with an audience. If you look at why people value the licence fee, one of the things that is overwhelming is when you have and thank you to the chair, a habitual relationship. So you spend mornings with someone, you feel incredibly connected to them. And Bill had this amazing warmth. And I think there's very few people, I think of, you know, a few DJs in history that have been legends and this, that and the other, that have that warmth of tone, but also that authority. And Bill had it. And, you know, frankly, we beat the BBC up and do our things, but actually when you see someone like Bill, and not only that, the way he went through his illness and transformed lots of lives in terms of their ability to go and get checked, he leaves an amazing legacy. So thank you.
Undoubtedly saved lives. And I think everybody's thoughts on this committee in this place are with his family.
Thank you very much.
You've got to remember there is a person, and it is his family we think of. John.
Thank you indeed, and I'd like to echo what you said about Bill Turnbull, who was an outstanding broadcaster. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Can we return to Emily Maitland's speech, which got so much attention? And I've heard Mr. Sharp's comments about the speech, where he agreed with it and where he disagreed with it. But perhaps we can focus a bit, since we're talking about impartiality specifically, on the person that she described as an active Tory agent within the BBC, and that's Sir Robbie Gibb. It might be helpful, Mr. Davie, if you tell us what role Robbie Gibb plays at the BBC. What's his job?
He's a board member.
So what does that mean? Because we know what that means, but a lot of people watching this wouldn't know what that means or what his job entails.
It might be worth dare I put my chair forward to say, as the chair of the board, he will tell you what I think he can articulate. I mean, I can give it a go, but I've talked a lot. I mean,
give it a go.
Well, the board oversees the BBC on behalf of the licence fee payer. It sets the strategy with the executive. But the executive deliver and are fully responsible for day-to-day operations and editorial oversight of the BBC, editorial leadership of the BBC. Now, this is not cryptic. The board members, through things like the Editorial Guidance Standard Committee, can oversee our performance.
Okay. Would you regard him as impartial?
I think everyone coming to the BBC on the board that I deal with puts the BBC first and absolutely understands and it supports me personally and the executive team to deliver impartiality. Yes.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
But by the way, I don't think anyone personally comes in any walk of life with total impartiality. That's one of the joys of the challenge, Mr. Nicholson, is when you come to the BBC, you focus wholly on sounds very worthy, a higher purpose, and that is to deliver impartial journalism, and that is critical.
Indeed. We've covered this before because we pointed out that you're a former Conservative candidate and Mr. Sharp is a very generous donor to the Conservative Party, has been in the past. So we've covered that and we know that. But when Mr. Gibb comes to the BBC, one of the roles I understood he played as a board member was to enforce and encourage impartiality. Would that be fair to say?
As part of an overall team in terms of supporting the Director General's #1 priority, I think that's totally appropriate.
Right, which makes it all the more extraordinary that after he was appointed, he liked a tweet from a Conservative Member of Parliament, Andrew Bowie, who said, "What a shambles. I'm very pleased that this will be the SNP's last few years in government." Why was Sir Robbie Gibb liking a tweet that was so blatantly party political?
I want to actually talk about what the action...
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to take a step back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, which is the BBC's approach to mistakes and impartiality.
We go back to that, but if you could just address specifically that tweet and why he felt that was appropriate and how you responded to it.
I'll come to the tweet. So, first of all, the issue is not that the BBC makes mistakes. The BBC has made mistakes in the past, it's making mistakes maybe today, and will make mistakes. The question is, what is the reaction function of the organisation? How does the governance operate so that we drive towards impartiality, look at mistakes, correct them, and have the right degree of accountability? And in that context, what is the role of the board and what is the role of the non-execs? Okay. Well, clearly a bright dividing line between the non-execs and the execs, which needs to operate, is the non-execs challenge the executives. And robust challenge takes place not just at the board, but at the committees to see whether the executive are executing as they should do in line with the strategy. And as we've discussed, strategy #1 is preserve and promote impartiality. Okay. Now, as part of that, there is a critical subcommittee, which is the Editorial Guidelines Standard Committee. Okay, we have our editorial guidelines. Those are the guidelines which Emily Maitland chafed against, as have others. And the subcommittee of the board, with the non-execs, scrutinises the output after broadcast and after this is a critical point, after it's been executed by the executive. The committee does not get involved before. Now, it has to challenge certain things. It has to challenge groupthink. It has to make sure the culture of the organisation is appropriate. It has to ensure that the editor-in-chief operates with the right degree of control. And obviously a critical member of that board now, of that subcommittee, will be Deborah Turnus, who has made it certainly her mission coming in to weaponise impartiality. Robbie Gibb sits on that committee. And Robbie Gibb has certainly got an experience of working at the BBC as you have. And I can only imagine, Mr. Nicholson, that when you were at the BBC, although you had political views, you also operated with impartiality.
Yeah, I would never have dreamt of liking a tweet that was party political like that. It would have been quite improper.
As an executive, exactly. So Robbie Gibb is not a broadcaster. He doesn't get involved in...
it's okay for him to express party political views, is it?
Well, non-executives should seek to avoid getting involved in controversial matters of controversy. Okay, that they should seek to. They are not required to by the governance of the BBC, but they should seek to. And certainly,
it's hard to imagine something more blatantly party political than that. So we kind of return to Emily Maitlis's point that he's an active Tory agent, because for him to like a Tory MP's tweet that says that he's very pleased that this will be the SNP's last few years in government, wishful thinking, I think. Mm-hmm. But for him to think that it was a wise thing to like that tweet and to be so blatantly party political reinforces Emily Maitlis' point. But you're saying that's okay because of the role he plays on the board.
No, what I'm saying is it's, first of all, until you raised that tweet, I was unaware of it. But what I am saying is, first of all, you need to distinguish non-executives and executives, and it's a critically important point.
The distinction, but okay. Can I just can I pin you down? Was that acceptable for him to like that tweet? Yes or no?
Well, it's the code of conduct for the non-execs.
What's your view?
The code of conduct for the non-execs is they're entitled not to. They're not governed by the same code of conduct.
I know that. You've told me that. But what's your view?
I would prefer that non-execs, in the same way, I'd prefer non-execs refrain from tweeting around controversial or partisan issues. Now,
we know what he thinks, and I'll move on to Tim if I may. To address your point, Mr. Davie, he's clearly not leaving his political opinions at the door, is he? He's letting the whole world know what his political opinions are, which is he wants to get rid of the SNP government.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the board oversight of the non-execs is not something. I mean. That the board needs to manage. In my view, my role, it's really straightforward, is do I face inappropriate editorial intervention, one, and two, which is what the audience really care about, is does that influence our ability to go about the work I need to do, which is report.
And people have accused him of inappropriate editorial interference. And Emily Maitlis says that he's a Tory active agent, and he's doing his very best to prove Emily Maitlis correct with his behaviour.
With respect, I think my concern is that that any construct of the board, and everyone comes to the board with lots of opinion, by the way. That's the joy of a board. But the acid test for me as editor-in-chief is, do I have power with the editors running the programmes? Are they interfered with in any way inappropriately? And also, are we not delivering on our mission of impartiality?
Yeah, but you can understand why people like Emily Maitlis will feel that she is onto something when a member of the board, who already comes with all the political baggage that you've described, but feels free to continue displaying open political bias once he's been appointed. But I think we've slightly exhausted this. What did you think of Laura Kuenssberg's first programme?
I thought it was fresh. I thought she handled it. I thought the interviews were outstanding, actually. I thought she was really good. I thought her tone was good. I thought she's a world-class journalist. I was very proud of it. I think on a new programme you try lots of things. These things get, many of the committee have worked at the BBC, so you tend to throw everything at it. But I thought it was a first-class programme.
The comedy part of it worked, the Joe Lycett bit.
Well, I think it's slightly bemusing, frankly. I mean, let's not over-egg it. Live television brings with it all kinds of joys. You can debate the merits of the booking. It may not be the next booking we make.
The Daily Mail's gone absolutely tonto about it. It's run a whole page, a whole front page, about a comedian taking the mickey out of the new Prime Minister.
Yes. What's your point, Mr. Nicholson? Sorry, I'm lost. I've got 28 complaints. I mean, I take these things seriously. I think we know that on a bit of live television, some of it was slightly bemusing. It doesn't affect the world-class job that Laura does. I think we've got ourselves a very good programme. I'm proud of the team. You're not going to get everything right as you select guests. I'm not. I'm lost on what the point.
My point is that you're under pressure over it. Obviously. I mean,
have you seen this job over the years, Mr. Nixon? I'm under. I mean, honestly, if I started reacting to every news item, I mean, I'd be half dead by now. I mean, for goodness' sake. I mean,
you're under pressure from board members. You're under pressure from newspapers. You're under a lot of pressure, certainly. Will you change the format because of that? I mean, are we likely to see Mr. Lycett back?
I'm not going to do. I mean, much as I've got lots of. The one thing I've learned in life is give a great producer and a great team give them the guardrails, give them feedback when they need to, but they make decisions. They'll keep learning. They'll adapt stuff. It's normal business. Let's move on.
Did Robbie Gibb complain about that out of interest?
Well, one is I don't know who the 28 complainants are, or the currently it's 66 complaints.
Did he complain?
I don't think I've had one complaint internally.
To you
I don't think I've had one complaint internally.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
On a general point, finally, don't you think it's good for political programmes, like any other programmes, occasionally to tweak the nose and mock the powerful? Isn't that quite healthy in a democracy?
More than quite helpful. It's essential.
Thank you.
Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the panel. I can't comment on the timing, but just as this meeting started, Nadine Dorries tweeted out her letter of resignation to the outgoing Prime Minister. How do you think this will affect licence fee negotiations, Tim?
That particular bit of news?
Yes.
Well, when Nadine came in, everyone asked me to second guess what would the effects be, and a rather cheap line, if I may, but I said I had 10 Secretary of States in 10 years, so it's very difficult to predict. I don't know is the answer. I think the BBC need to be very clear, and we can come to it, which we know even today we published some principles around what we think about this morning we published some principles about funding the BBC. What I would say, the stakes are high. The stakes are high to the UK creative industries, what kind of media we have, things like the media bill, what prominence we have, what sports rights we list, I could go on. All these decisions are incredibly important to how we shape our media, our national discussion, the events, local journalism, which we may come on to. All these things are really important.
And how were negotiations going?
On what?
The future of the licence fee and everything else in relation to the fee that taxpayers.
Well, the government it's relatively clear is that we've obviously got a licence fee for 2 years flat and 4 years CPI, as this committee knows only too well. But the government announced that they were interested in a review where they were looking at options of how you could fund the BBC. I think Richard can speak for the board, but I think we absolutely have some clear principles which we've set out because we think it's really important that we preserve things like our impartiality, the mission of the BBC, we grow the creative industry. So it's not as if we're saying everything's over. There's a framework here, I think, that's really important. The impartiality and independence of the BBC, I think. But what we were waiting for at that point was the announcement around who would lead a review and that process. That has obviously stalled due to all the changes that have been going on. So we now wait for a new Secretary of State, and I look forward to working with them.
Do you expect that review to actually take place, and do you still welcome it as a review?
Overall, I think it is right that we look at it is a subject that many have returned to as this committee, I think it was in March 21, said we looked at everything, and the licence fee is the option at the moment. But there is no doubt the market is changing rapidly. I mean, I think the idea, by the way, that the BBC's got its head in the sand or intransigent is, if I may, ridiculous. We're looking at the change in the market. I think it is appropriate we look at what's the right funding mechanism for the BBC. Having said that, I do believe in a mainstream public service intervention and the things that are precious about the BBC. I took the earlier point that we should focus on the UK, but now and again it is worth just having a look at the rest of the world and seeing what happens when you've got market failure public service operations. It is not, I've been here before and I'll keep banging that drum. It is not a coincidence that we've got strong creative industries.
Can we just discuss the fact that obviously the licence fee has been frozen for 2 years? You've already outlined a series of steps you're taking to cope with that, the impact of that decision on services. Now, we've seen, inflation go up. We've seen the cost of energy bills. For all of your buildings, that must be an absolute nightmare, given you've got many dotted around the country. Do you think those cuts are going to have to be reviewed? Do you think you'll have to go further and faster in looking at the services you provide and perhaps disappoint more viewers and listeners?
Yeah, we're under very significant pressure due to the decision to keep the licence fee flat, which we didn't want. Lee, do you want? You might want to give a little bit of flavour to that in terms of some of the numbers and what we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So we said at the time, of course, when the licence fee was announced, that we would see an income gap by 27-28 of 285 million. Of course, we have seen cost of living and inflation rise since then, and as Tim has rightly said, that does put further pressure on that income gap as a result of having 2 years for that. We talked earlier in May about further transformation that the BBC will need to be going through. We announced a 500 million savings and reinvestment plan, which related directly to further cuts we will be having to make of 200 million, and then a further 300 million looking at our content and services and prioritising where we would have to stop content and services and where we would look to make reinvestments. And of course, in the current environment, which is challenging for many, many people across the UK, higher energy bills, which has already been mentioned today, that absolutely does put pressure on our cost base at the BBC and will require us to continue to look for more productivity efficiencies, but also it will stretch into some of our content and services as well.
Thank you. And Tim, back to you. What do you expect? You might have to make a decision. Are we facing a bleak future for some services? We've heard about the changes to the BBC News channel, the closure of Radio 4 Extra on DAB, for example, and the closure of the Oxford and Cambridgeshire TV news programmes. Can you see any further changes along those lines that the viewers will notice?
Possibly. Yeah, I think, just to get the numbers really clear, so we had a gap of, because you missed 2 years of inflation, our initial forecast was by the time you got to 27-28, the end of the charter, you've got a 285 million gap. And our principles of the leadership team are really clear, which is, and some of us, both of us have worked in the commercial sector working through this, which is, how do you take costs down as far as you can in any area you can without affecting the audience that's sensible, of course. So, and that requires restraint across the board, looking at every single cost, benchmarking that. Deloitte's have done lots of work. We're getting there because the BBC, obviously, public service organisations, if I may, do have reputations sometimes where there's cost there. We've gone after everything pretty hard, and you still look at that. You look at what's your operating model, how do you structure things. All of that comes first. Okay, then you get to more painful decisions, and you've listed pretty much spot on some of the decisions that we've had to make. Now there is other mitigations, by the way, which is the commercial arm is doing really well, and I know we get lost in all the various issues, but one of the things in the annual report you see is a stellar year for the commercial arm of the BBC, and that helps us mitigate some of the problems we're talking about here. But there's absolutely no doubt about it. The job for us now is to say, okay, we've got 285 of savings. We now think that the landing zone is 400 to 500. Obviously, this is a moving feast to a point. What other actions would we take? All I will say is it's way too early to say this is where it would fall or this is where it would go. We'll do all we can to try and mitigate audience impact, because our strategy is really simple. My strategy is simple. Give you great value for the £13 a month. So anything that does, and that's why that settlement is so painful for us, because anything that detracts from that value undermines the BBC. Let's be really clear about it.
One of the concerns I've always had about the BBC as a former employer, but now as a member of Parliament covering a very rural area, is that the BBC often cuts services closest to those who pay for it, i.e. local services, be that inside out, be that the Cambridgeshire, Oxfordshire Ops for local TV news and things like that. Why is that? Why are those services the ones you target? Because they actually have very loyal audiences.
No, and on my watch, by the way, and I know there's a couple of members of the committee who feel extremely strongly and rightly about this, which is the local services of the BBC, actually the local services of themselves, that local imprint of the radio stations, the region, absolutely critical. People know that I talk about the most successful TV show in Britain being the 6:30. Fact, yeah. That and also pushing, by the way, stuff out of London. We could talk about that because I think that has been extremely successful the last couple of years. To your point, the area where we have ring-fenced and not cut funding is local. Just to be really clear, we're not cutting. The decision around the Oxford and Cambridgeshire Op is because if we believe that if we don't spend more money on having a effective digital offer locally, if we don't reskin the offer, we are going to be so out of line with the market that we're in trouble. Okay, in terms of our reach numbers, and then the thing begins to be less potent. So we have made. If I didn't have the pressure of the budget being cut, would I have to do that so quickly? Those choices could be, but we are not cutting money in local.
You say that the 6:30 is the most successful TV programme in the country. If you're living in the former areas where these Cambridgeshire and Oxford Ops are, how relevant will that news be to those audiences? The reason those Ops were created in the first place was to target the audiences that are there. But now the news will come from Southampton.
There's always a tension with
Norwich, which is completely different.
There's always a tension in those regions in terms of just where you stop and start and what's relevant. I mean, outside Oxford, so you get different stories. We will still be covering those areas. Remember, we've also got a strong online offer. Those journalists will still be in Oxford and Cambridge.
You're not actually cutting journalism numbers, are you? You're just cutting actual programme output.
Right. So, and actually our investment in local remains strong. I think, frankly, if we had more investment, I think we need to continue to invest and grow our local offer, and I think it's an absolute key strength of the BBC.
I'll hold you to that. Thank you.
Damien Green.
Thank you, Chair. One last sort of trip round impartiality. I'm struck by most of the sort of flack you've been taking this morning has been, if you like, from the left, based on Emily Maitlis, who I suspect some of my colleagues might regard as an active Labour agent for at least part of the time. She was at the BBC, certainly when she was doing that famous or infamous monologue. But historically, certainly, I mean, you've heard this morning from John and Clive and from Emily Maitlis before, the sort of criticism of Tory influence on the BBC. Many of my colleagues, have it as an absolute article of faith that the BBC is full of metropolitan latte drinking lefties and suffers from groupthink of the liberal left. And the BBC's traditional attitude has always been, as long as we're getting flack from both sides, then actually we're probably doing it right. Is there a sort of modern version of that? I mean, do you still think that's true?
Can I come into that point first of all? And I'd like to just also clarify something with Mr. Nicholson. Robbie Gibb did not in fact like that tweet, although you're correct in terms of the data element. What actually happened was, and I told you I was unaware of it, I'm now aware of what happened. In scrolling through tweets, his finger actually passed over that particular area of the telephone, which meant that the heart, I suppose it's the heart, got crushed. But he did not like that tweet specifically. So I just want to address that. Secondly, Secondly, I didn't come back to you on the agent point, which is absolutely wrong. Just to be categorical. He does not operate on the board as an agent of the Conservative Party. That was completely wrong. It was one of the errors that Emily Maitlis made, and I'm very disappointed that she made that particular point.
Do you want to address the
So addressing your point in terms of which I think has been raised by a prior DG, I don't agree with that point. I think you have to look at complaints on their merits. And I don't think the BBC should just take comfort if it gets complaint from both sides that it's got things right. I think we have to be, and this goes to the earlier point on governance, and why we, indeed, in addition, we have 2 external members of the Editorial Guidance Standards Committee. So the BBC, in a natural and instinctive defensive way, shouldn't be defensive. It should be open and should evaluate what the criticisms are, what the complaints are, And it may be that if the same situation gets complaints from both sides, that may well reflect the fact that it was impartial. But we should look at each individual complaint on its merits and not take comfort if we're getting complaints from both sides that we're getting it right.
Thank you. That's quite interesting and is an update. Just for the sort of purposes of accuracy, I've gone onto Bobby Gibbs' Twitter feed and discover that he clearly doesn't tweet a lot. That his last tweet was on the 22nd of May of this year, rejoicing at the news that Leeds United had stayed up. So I think, and looking at that, it's literally about one tweet a month. So I think, you know, this is, I can believe that scrolling through, he pressed the like button at the wrong time. But on the sort of wider issue then of impartiality, the Director General said that you're getting 48% sort of trust levels. Does that differ from people who are broadly describe themselves as left-wing politically or right-wing politically? Is there any change in that?
It's the data says you're marginally less likely to be aligned to the BBC if you're, you know, on the right. But it's both sides are. And then you've got a lot of people who don't know, frankly. But it's not overwhelming on one side or the other. It's marginal.
And is it moving for either of those groups, sort of broadly left and broadly right? Is there a trend, or is that flat as well?
It's moving. There's not overwhelming trends. I mean, I think the societal trend that we're worried about is just losing trust in everything. By the way, this is a bigger issue. The really worrying data is not currently that. It's the 16 to 34s. I saw a number that 67% don't believe any news source can be trusted. So we've got a massive, and you'll see actually we're you know, the communication with Deborah Turness coming on. This idea that showing people our workings in terms of, Deborah mentioned yesterday about transparency, how we verify, the process by which our teams in Ukraine look at their sources, all of that. I think we've got a real job to do on that sits almost above what you're talking about. I mean, there's always going to be the puts and takes of the political parties, but there's a bigger topic here, which is verification. I mean, those programs, I think they're getting more valuable. Reality Check, more or less, all these programs. I think there's a real need for us to be at the centre with proper data. That's what we've got to do.
Do you have a strategy for saying to 16 to 34-year-olds, this is why you should trust us rather than TikTok or Facebook?
That's what I'm saying. I think you're going to see us get, and it's probably one of the next phases of the work, the answer is we need to be more front-footed about that.
Okay, thanks. I mostly wanted to ask, you've just mentioned the commercial income, and it's clear in the wider atmosphere of a frozen licence fee that this commercial income is going to become more and more important, and indeed they've gone up. Is that a trend, do you think? What are your predictions for the years ahead?
I think there's real potential for the commercial arm. I think we've got to be careful. This committee's actually been, it's been a good discussion and a nuanced discussion that doesn't lead to a scenario in which you can abandon the licence fee, or you're not close to that. But in terms of being hugely material to our ability to mitigate some of the things we've talked earlier, plus also invest in programming. So as you know, in order to get some of these ridiculous episode prices, I mean, you look at Lord of the Rings, you look at, I heard the price per episode for Stranger Things, it's really, really difficult. Now the good news is, by the way, our drama's on rather spectacular form and doing well. But the commercial arm, in a short answer, is yes, we see the real potential, both on the production side, but also on the direct-to-consumer side, yes.
And what was the thinking behind moving global news into BBC Studios?
Simply put, there was a lot of, I think there was a lot of duplication. You've got, in terms of the ad sales capability, just back office, HR departments. Global News was essentially a break-even at best business, but actually by selling it as a package, the channel. You know, by the way, this isn't editorial. The editorial control through news remains. That's also. It's just simply. It made a lot of sense to do that. I think that's a no-brainer, frankly.
And your aim for that is to break even, is it?
No, I think over time you want to see a margin. You want to see some margin from that and use the efficiencies to get to profit. But I don't think you're looking at transformational numbers to the BBC's finances. Put it that way. Okay. Is that a fair summary, Leo?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And you make the point that as it were, the editorial control stays as it was. A sort of similar related question about children. Children's productions are now inside BBC Studios as well. Clearly, the children's programming is an area of real danger in the new world that we all know is here, particularly children's programmes that have a British voice. I mean, this seems to be one of the prime things the BBC should be doing. So is there any effect there on the sort of editorial content?
None at all in terms of the BBC, just like natural history, the BBC commissioner, who's spending our money to find the right programming, is it fully empowered to buy from the production side of the BBC. The logic of studios is really straightforward. I mean, you couldn't have put it better, which is, I think we're under real pressure in terms of British children's programming, retaining talent, keeping, and you know, frankly, if I urge, you know, if you want to visit, there's an invite, to go to Bristol to the Natural History Unit and see that, I think, you know, a few years ago they had about 400 people working there. Last count, I think we had about 800 people. That's not all full-time, but 800 people on our books. We're doing projects. We've attracted the talent, kept the talent, and by the way, watch Frozen Planet 2 and see how we're delivering for the BBC, which is just coming, which is sensational. So my view is that model does not erode our capabilities, quite the reverse. It builds our capability to keep talent and do the very things you're talking.
So what's the equivalent? I mean, you've given us the numbers on natural history. What are the children's numbers equivalent, as it were?
I can't remember. I could give you them, but we're not at the... we're at the foothills of this one, because we've just done the transfer. So what you do is you take across the children's department, then they can win work for the BBC and beyond as a British production house. So, you know, we'll be in the midst of that change at the moment and sorting out what it looks like in studios. We're not at the point of that growth. Now, who knows where that goes in the future in terms of the growth it can deliver.
And I was going to say, do you think children's programming can become a profit centre?
Without that, I mean, the commercial arm wouldn't take it unless it could see a route to profit, just so you know. It's not the commercial arm. Part of what we do, as you know, is to make sure that we have clear EBITDA targets in terms of return. You know, this is a fully functioning commercial arm that needs to deliver profit. It's not a subsidy operation, and the board oversee that from a fair trading point of view, absolutely. So no, the studios are not forced to do this stuff. Studios under strong leadership need to see this, they look at things as a business case, and they're convinced by it.
Okay, thank you.
I want to go back to something you alluded to earlier before. So starting off with having axed Inside Out, which we talked about. I think your first appearance here via Zoom. I raised issues then about its replacement, not having investigative journalists. That's now been axed. I think the lack of investigative journalists probably was a big factor in the disaster that We Are England was. But you now seem to have abandoned any guarantee of a future dedicated series of regional current affairs programmes on BBC One. Do you think you've got an obligation to licence fee payers in the regions to provide prime time, airtime to cover issues that are specifically relevant to them?
Yes, but not necessarily always in a bespoke 30-hour format in the way we've done. Because I don't think that's the best. I don't think that does.
So how do you see that panning out?
Well, how I see it panning out, and by the way, I think you're right. It's been a journey.
I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so.
The good news is that in the future, it links to the point about local and some of the choices that we're making. So we'll have in the future we're looking at a team of 80 people in terms of investigative journalism. That's up from 45 who were working on We Are England. We can talk about the exact scope and this, that and the other. That is 11 investigative teams. And by the way, I think this is quite exciting for us to have proper 11 investigative teams doing nothing but proper investigative journalism, nothing else doing that work. When they've got those stories, the biggest outlet...
Where are they going to be based?
They're across the country. I've got the list. I can give you the list of cities, but they're across the country. They're certainly not sitting in London. And then what we will do is those stories will then feed into the 6:30s, feed into online. If we get a big story, we can give them half an hour and a programme. What I don't think has worked, and I still stick to that bit of it in terms of what didn't work for Inside Out, was having hours and hours of real estate to fill. I'd much rather have 80 people looking at that investigative stories and doing the work. And we'll come to it maybe in other areas, but most people are getting their news by a country mile through the mobile phone, through online. We need to make sure those stories are going through those.
It's not just news, is it? It's those investigative stories that were relevant to regions.
I agree. Totally agree.
So people, they're not going to, if you're just going to show them on the news every now and again, not on prime time BBC One, that isn't really fulfilling your obligation, I don't think.
Well, I think we need to do full justice to the investigation. You've seen the BBC do some investigations over the year, you know, even recently, in terms of that. I think you can, there's various formats, whether we go for a half-an-hour programme or whether we will do justice to those investigations and those teams. That's what we've got to do. What I don't want to be, and I don't think this has worked, if I may, through Inside Out and We Are England, is having vast amounts of BBC One real estate and just the objective to fill it, as opposed to going out, to your point, going out and getting those investigations done. Then we can decide how we publish them. And I think that could be long reads, it could be features on the 6:30, it could be a half-an-hour programme on BBC One. That I think, that flexibility, I think, is the right thing. The key is investigative capability. I really believe that.
Have you asked Ofcom to allow you to abandon or reduce your minimum quota of regional current affairs of minutes on BBC One?
I'd have to check that. I don't know where we are with Ofcom on that, actually, in terms of...
Can you advise the committee? Because that's a very, very serious point. And I think we need to know whether you have asked Ofcom that, because I think what you're proposing is actually in breach of what you currently should be doing. I don't think it's in line with it at all. So if you could let us know that.
We'll send a note back to you on that, of course.
Great. And you've talked a lot about growth opportunity around the world, the deficit in democracy, all of these things, and the appointment of your new Director of News today, yesterday, this week anyway.
Yes,
yet the BBC are undergoing, announced in the summer, this massive change, getting rid of the BBC News channel. Why are you closing that domestic BBC News channel when it's charged under the operating licence to cover more local and regional news than its commercial rivals?
May I just make an overarching point, which I think this committee needs to grapple with, because we as a board are grappling with. This is an organisation that's had a 30% reduction in real terms over the last 10 years, and then on top of it, it's now facing, in real terms, probably another 13% this year, maybe, and then another 10% beyond. Financially, I'm coming to.
I'm in the chair. I asked a question which I would like answered, actually.
Okay.
And then I'm happy for you to come in with the financials, but it was a very straightforward question of why are you closing the domestic BBC News channel?
Well, I was explaining there is a financial aspect to some of these decisions we're having to take, which will cover this area, which has difficult financial decisions we're having to make as a result of it, including consolidation for more efficient.
Not consolidation. This is closing the BBC domestic news channel, which is a huge thing to do.
If I may, we are closing the news channel and the international and the global news channel, and we're launching a live channel that will go into the UK. Be broadcast from London throughout the day, by the way.
Aimed at a global audience.
And we'll have a stream, a UK stream. Now let's get to the UK stream and a global stream. By the way, I am utterly unapologetic, that having two completely separate organisations in a world in which, I think yesterday 18 million people came or whatever to the news site. We've got vast amounts of volume coming through online now. These changes are fundamental, by the way. If you look at how many people are actually consuming linear news, it is reducing fast.
You have an obligation under your operating licence.
And absolutely we will deliver on that. Now, what will you see in the UK? Now, by the way, many of these pressures come because we've had to move fast based on some of the funding issues we've got. But I think it's if you go to any newsroom in the world, the idea that we're just going to sit investing that amount of resources on linear and not having the capability to invest in digital would be wrong. Now, then you get to your question directly, what is the provision in the UK? And we're working through that, we're in consultation. But just to be clear, UK audiences will have a stream which will be, there'll be overwhelming amount of UK content. I mean, obviously you've got breakfast, you've got strands that we already put across both news channels.
Can I just
will have a live and sorry if I may, we'll have a team that can handle new and breaking news.
But they won't be there in studio ready to act.
We'll have a small team that can always react to any major.
Yeah, but will they be in the studio ready to go when something happens?
They will be able to go into the studio.
They'll be able to go into the studio.
Yeah. Well, they're not sitting in the studio because we may be doing an opt-out.
So the reaction to live stories will be less than it is now if people aren't already there doing the job. It's got to be.
It's marginal.
Well, it depends where they're travelling from, I would have suggested. But
just to be clear, it's really important this because this model work is around the world. There will be a news live team there who are able to react to events.
Who will be called in to cover
they're
the story.
there on the ground.
Yes, but when you've got a live 24-hour news channel, you have people there working on it. You have, the backup. You have everything there. If something breaks, what the BBC have been very, very good at is if a story breaks and starts to unfold, the presenters talking about it straight away. The people are there following it up. The backroom staff, whatever role they play.
Sure, and we want to continue that.
That won't be that cannot be as reactive if you haven't got a team already there.
But let's just go through a day. If I may, you've got breakfast where we're reacting. So what are we actually talking about here? Then we've proposed that Nicky Campbell, which I think will be a good show, and he'll have phone-in. I think getting more voices onto that channel rather than...
That's just broadcasting the radio.
But if I'm... Sorry, what's wrong with that?
Well, that's not news. That's broadcasting a radio programme. That is not news.
No, I understand that. But what I mean by that is Nicky Campbell is is a fantastic journalist who can break a story on air. Now, the fact he's sitting in a radio studio that can be visualised versus a desk, so it's still it's for UK audiences. That's what 5 Live does on a daily basis. That's how the media will work. Look, I think these decisions. I think it's absolutely appropriate that we make these decisions.
So what percentage of this new global-facing programme is going to be domestic news? What percentage is going to be regional and local news?
You say regional or local, you mean
yes.
the local? I don't know yet. We're working through and in consultation. It would be premature of me to say exactly the hours as we go through.
You must have some idea of where you're aiming this at.
Well, we've got all the various strands that we do in terms of, as I say, you've got breakfast, you've got 6, you've got the 1, you've got the various gaps where we will go into. When you've got a global show, you'll have advertising time that you can give regional and local stories in. The idea that we invest more heavily in linear at this point, when I need the capability to make sure... the audiences on the daytime and news channel, it's important, but they're much smaller.
You've just invested 16 million on doing up the studios for news and...
Absolutely, because linear...
And that's linear, and yet you're saying linear is not important.
I'm not saying linear is not important. I'm saying a linear news channel has... in terms of the way the market is moving. This is not me driving the market. This is the linear news channel will only get you so many people. I mean, if you talk to people outside in the street, we're not seeing big audiences in the moment to the news channel. They're getting the big audiences are to live and breaking stories.
You think the big audiences will come when you go global facing and you're reporting more stories from around the world?
No, I don't. I think the structural challenges for linear news, broadcast linear. You're not going to see it. You're not going to see vast growth in broadcast. People watching broadcast news day to day. And I say it with somewhat heavy heart because I'm a traditionalist to a degree. People are going to be looking, as they do in this committee. They'll look at their phones, and they'll look at a stream, and they'll look at those live streams, and we need to make sure they're world class and invest in them.
Were you seeking to have the operating licence diluted?
No.
You're not?
Well, we're talking to Ofcom in terms of, as you know, Ofcom have put out a statement saying that they want to keep an eye on the plans, but they don't see it as a material change.
And can I just ask, how do you justify sanctioning what will amount to a democratic deficit, in my view, as pointed out recently by the TUC, when you cannot properly cover issues that matter to the UK but not to the rest of the world? And that question is really important, bearing in mind what you've said to the committee this morning about democratic deficits.
Just to be clear, this doesn't affect our news gathering capability and all the thousands of journalists in the BBC who are doing brilliant work, generating stories locally, regionally, nationally. They all do their work. We're talking about a distribution platform. We're not talking about commissioning a story. We're talking about that is not materially affected by this proposal.
So have you been upfront with Ofcom about this being a material change, which would require a public interest test?
I think we've been very clear with Ofcom. We're briefing them on what we're doing.
Have you said it's a material change? Because I think it is a material change.
I haven't said it's a material change. That's for them to judge. What I've described is what we're doing. What my team has described is what we're doing.
And can I ask the Chair, do you think that it's a material change. Are you comfortable with this?
Yes, no, I am comfortable.
And do you feel you're getting all your information from the organisation that you need to make a judgment on this?
Yes, there's a process in the plans, and as Tim, as Director General, said, they're formulating the plans, they're consulting with the teams involved. It's a painful process, and as I was trying to explain, we're going to have to continue to have painful processes at the BBC as a result of the funding. And what we have to ensure is that we maintain the standards of output. So when the final plan is brought to the board in terms of the execution, we will be looking at the issues you raise, and I'm quite happy to communicate with you where we get to on that, because you raise a very important point, which is we still want to ensure that the domestic consumer is receiving the information, the news, in a timely fashion and in a way that is effective with the domestic audience.
Can I just ask, do you not think this would have been more appropriate to wait? You've just appointed this new director, you've had an interim director, and would it not have been more appropriate to wait till the person who's going to be responsible for news to come in to look at what's going on and propose changes than to do this while you've got somebody interim and come off with these ideas that I have to say I'm very worried about. I am very worried about. I mean, I'm not opposed to having global news. I'm very interested in foreign policy. But I do worry that actually the people in this country rely on the BBC for that very factual, local, regional and national and international news. And if this domestic programme is now not going to be there and it's going to be globally faced, I think you're going to put off audiences, not actually draw audiences. Because I don't think the vast majority of people in this country want to see lots and lots of global news. They're much more interested in what's going on in their own surroundings, their own regions and their own country. Would it not have been better to wait to do this properly and perhaps take wider counsel on?
Well, we're in consultation and we're also talking to the new Director of News, but I think we're set on this plan because look, your concerns are really, we wrestle with them internally. They're absolutely the right concerns.
I'm not opposed to modernisation.
They're absolutely right concerns, though. I just want to be clear about this. They are absolutely right concerns. And this is what the board can oversee is, are we providing a service that's relevant to UK users? The question is, does visualised radio really dilute? What does that look like? We're very sensitive to that, but we're facing enormous market changes. There's not a newsroom in the world that's not going through radical modernisation. We're looking at the numbers coming to the news channel versus that coming to online, and people say, we could do the better resources for our online capabilities, news on iPlayer, and we've got a 30% cut in real terms on 10 years. So, and we're not closing a UK stream. We're delivering you. So I think the question is, what results from these changes? What does it look like for UK audiences? Ofcom have said it isn't a material change on first look, but they've said, you can have a look at the letter. The letter basically says, absolutely look at what the changes look like. We need to keep an eye on this. The board will see the final proposals, and I think we're all healthily worried in the way you are on that. We're just trying to find an answer that makes sense. What I do think is right is having two completely separate operations, with respect. And this is not a criticism of any individuals who are outstanding. There's brilliant people. I was on the floor. I mean, they do wonderful work. This is not a criticism of anyone. But having completely separate organisations, doing completely separate things, with no sense of where you overlap, where things... Now, there is some sharing of programming, but we are way away in the modern world from having, if I may, a properly effective operation to deliver 24-hour news. And I think the new Director of News will be supportive of that.
Wait and see, and I'd be interested to see the information you send us. John.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I can pursue that a little bit more, because I sent out a tweet, as I often do, to ask BBC staff and others what they're most concerned about and invite people to send me direct messages. And I think since I've been on this committee, the three issues that have most exercised people's BBC staff are equal pay, over 75's licence settlement, where the BBC staff were clearly right and the management was wrong because you've had to make serious cuts because of that, and now this issue of the merging of the channels. So can I ask you, from a journalistic perspective, how do you provide news which is as relevant to Kiev as it is to Carlisle?
Well, it depends on the story, Ms. Nicholson.
on a channel, on an ongoing basis?
Well, you have a variety of output. You have two things, actually. One is you look at your lineup, and as the chair said, I think there is relevant global stories. And by the way, we do it already with programming where we share with global news. There are programs, international business, other areas topics that I think are very useful to UK audiences. And look, you have to also say that in the context of the UK audience to linear news channels and what that looks like. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we are building into the schedule, and with respect, we'll have to just go through the consultation and see what that schedule actually looks like. And but I think there'll be a lot of space for UK coverage and our ability to do that. Finally, if I may, you have capability to deal with breaking stories, and the BBC's got good capability in that, and be able to break them, and that was the chair's fair concern in terms of when something breaks in a big story, how do we get it out there? That's what we need to look at.
If I'm sitting in Kyiv, I'm just simply not going to be interested in what the rainfall is in Carlisle. I'm not. I'm not going to be interested in the road conditions in Liverpool. The danger surely
we're not going to be giving you that. Sorry, this is. I just want to get we'll have the global stream that will come together at certain parts, but there's a global stream. We're not going to give people, the traffic jam in Reading if they're sitting in Montreal. That's not going to be happening, to be very clear.
Okay, well, just to try and understand it then. So I know that you're going to simulcast the big news programs, breakfast, presumably BBC 1 o'clock news, and so on throughout the day. But if it's out with those times, if it's say 3 o'clock, and there's a major traffic accident outside Liverpool,
yes,
are you saying that you're not going to cut away to that?
No, I've just told you exactly the opposite, which is I said we'll have a new news and breaking team available to go on air.
Am I going to be watching that if I'm in Kiev?
No.
No.
Well, unless you're... no.
I think we're all just trying to understand how this is going to work.
Because there's a global stream. So we don't need to switch to the global stream across.
Right. So throughout the day, if there's a breaking news story, you will cut away from whatever is on and go purely domestic. Is that correct?
Just to be clear, I think there's two streams. They're managed by one team. It's not a merger. You're closing both channels, and it's not a merger. You're closing the channel, and then you've got two streams. The streams can be managed, but by one operation, and they can make the sensible editorial decisions that you're only too aware of and you've done in your past.
It's kind of interesting because your own staff don't seem to think this is the way that it's going to work, including some of your own presenters, some of your own on-air staff from both channels.
There's plenty of valid concerns, but we're in consultation.
That seems such a simple thing to explain to them. It's extraordinary that these journalists, whose job it is to interview and to understand relatively complicated issues and to distill them, seem to be labouring under such misapprehensions about this. Why do you think you've not managed to persuade your staff of how this will work?
Because we're in consultation, we wanted to talk about those things and see how the streams would work. But I take your point, and thank you for the feedback.
How many journalists are going to work now on this, and what job cuts will be involved?
Overall, we're looking at cutting 46 roles. We've currently got 162 roles across the News Channel and World News. That will be 116 roles. Now, linked to that, it's also pretty tough because we've also got 33.5 because it's half a post, but 33.5 roles on other teams supporting. So the net change will be closure of 79.5 roles. We're creating 7 new roles, in Radio 5 Live. So the net is 72.5. And then we've also got, just for what it's worth, we're creating 20 new roles in Washington, but I think that's not going to help unless we want to move. So overall, we're looking at 72 to 73 roll closures. That's not. Then you get into how can we redeploy? People are moving across the BBC. We do everything in terms of reskilling. How do we make that work? So that's the challenge for us.
Am I correct that adverts will continue to be run on the international broadcasts?
Yes.
And of course, as we know, you can't use any part of the licence fee, can you, for commercial purposes of this kind? Am I right in that, or am I wrong?
You can only use it within fair trading guidelines and then cost recover. It's quite complex. So in other words, you could, as long as the commercial arm pays fair value for what it's getting, then public service, that's like, natural history programming or news may be used in commercial services, but there has to be a fair price paid for it.
Are you concerned that some of the BBC's competitors are going to say that this isn't fair competition, and that they might have a point because they'll say that it's cross-fertilisation, you're using licence fee money to help news broadcasts that compete directly against them as commercial broadcasters?
All I would say is we've got a very robust fair trading regime overseen by the chairman and the board, and they could address any concerns, but I don't think I've got concerns in that area.
Finally, on the question of staffing, it's not a lot of journalists, is it, to handle a big breaking news story as it comes in? I mean, I did September the 11th at the BBC, and I just remember one of the great strengths of the BBC was you're suddenly surrounded, because for the first 10 minutes we knew nothing, and then later on we almost knew too much. There was so much coming in to be processed. And one of the great strengths was the people, the journalists. If you're sitting there as the news presenter, the people are coming in to help you.
Sure.
Are you comfortable with staff pruned back to that level, and setting aside the question of different editorial priorities, that you could cope with a major breaking news event?
Well, there's 2 points. One is, I think 136 people to run, that's the 20 in Washington as well, 116 in London to run the news streams, broadcast streams, I think is a good number. I don't think it's quite as simple as that, because the news gathering operation, Chris Mason, all the political reporters are there to serve news. It's not as if they're sitting there without support. We've got hundreds of journalists on our news gathering operation that fill our outlets. By the way, the biggest tension, I think, for most people is not that where you're going. It's actually that the demand on those journalists to fill online streams, radio programmes, all of that. That's the biggest tension for the news channel, by who they get on air. That doesn't change too largely. I mean, the hundreds of journalists who are there in our news gathering operation are there to serve the news streams, the channels, the live. They're all there. They're all there. So do I think 116 people, 136 in total versus 162 can manage it? Yes, I do. Sure. Thank you.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go to back to the licence fee, if I may. I understand that there has been an increase in the licence fee. Trust statement said that in 2021-22 the licence fee evasion had risen to 8.93%. compared to 6.95% in 2019-20. I mean, that's kind of nearly 1 in 10 evasion. How much is that to do, that figure to do with the change in the age-related concession?
Do you mean in the over 75s?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're right, it has increased over the last 2 years by a couple of percentage points. I think there are a number of reasons that drive that. Of course, changing behaviour and media market behaviour and watching behaviour, which of course we've talked a lot about already. We've also seen over the last 2 years, and including in the last year, fewer visits, so fewer of our visiting officers attending households, and that will have some level of reduction on enforcement. And then, of course, your point specifically on the over 75s, when they were receiving free licences, they were not evading at all, so they were at 100% covered. We have seen similar levels. You talked about 1 in 10, so 9 in 10 licences remain correctly licensed, and we see that same trend across the general population in the over 75s now as we do more generally.
Yes, but this is a very serious issue, isn't it? Because it undermines the entire licence fee argument. And as we know, that argument is up in the air at the moment, people calling for it to be abolished, etc. What are you going to do about enforcement? As you say, there's a lack of enforcement. How do you beef it up? 1 in 10 are evading now.
Well, I think 90% of addresses across the United Kingdom that are correctly licensed is still a very, very significant portion of people who watch the BBC and who continue to correctly pay for their licenses. I think evasion is challenging for the BBC. We pay particular attention to that. We work particularly hard with the TV licensing unit to ensure that actually we are, where we're making visits, we are following those through. And we are ensuring that for those who do genuinely pay their licence fee, that they are not subsidising those who choose not to. And I think that is important The licence fee isn't perfect, but it does need an enforcement mechanism, and I think that's right, because by far and away, as I've just described, 90% of people are paying their licences correctly.
And we've got the cost of living crisis coming down the road at us very fast indeed, and some measures must be made to ensure that you receive the monies that you should be getting through the licence fee, but also how do you help people access the BBC?
Well, I think the cost of living challenge is hugely difficult for many people. Of course, the licence fee is being held flat over the next 2 years, so that is not increasing, and we are seeing increases in competitors who are putting up their prices despite those challenges. We do also see that the licence fee remains very good value for money. We talked last year, we did some analysis that went out and looked at if you were to get equivalent set of subscription services for the range of the services the BBC offers you, so across radio, online news and television watching, that was advertising free. Last year that would have cost you £450 a year in comparison to £159 a year on the licence fee. I think the licence fee remains good value. Of course, absolutely critical to us is ensuring that we continue to deliver that value for audiences, and that audiences see themselves and portrayal and actually enjoy and value those services, and that is central to the strategy that we continue to run and will focus on.
Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of the licence fee. I feel it helps with impartiality and all the other issues we've been discussing. It's just that it has to be dealt with evenly and equitably, as you say. Is technology helping you in chasing the evasion of licence fee?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some places where technology will help us, and for example, email matching for those who watch the iPlayer, for example, and we will be able to use technology to identify where people are watching the iPlayer. But of course, one of the reasons why we still have the licence fee is that there is no gating process for linear TV watching across the United Kingdom, and until we have technology that enables us to gate linear TV services and of course match and directly link a person in a premise with watching linear TV, then that technology, that continues to be a challenge on enforcement. So yes, we use technology in small areas, particularly around digital watching where we can, but more broadly on broadcast linear TV services, we don't yet have the technology across the UK to gate those.
Can I just bring in a very personal part of this? At one point I had a flat in London, and I didn't have a television, and I didn't watch television in this flat. I just used it as a crash pad. I was bothered by the enforcement on a regular basis, and eventually had an interview who just couldn't believe that I wouldn't be watching television or on any of my devices in the flat, and I was just literally using it as a crash. Eventually they accepted my argument. Now this must go on and cost a fortune to do this, so I would imagine introduction of accurate technological backup would be absolutely vital to make sure you get this right.
I think one of the absolute challenges for linear broadcast television and access to BBC services and our ability to gate those is a fundamental requirement to changing the funding model as well, and that will absolutely be something that we will also be looking at.
It's a very interesting point, because one of the flip sides of this is the access of open broadcast services, DTT, mean you don't know who's watching. So you then have the effort of collecting the licence fee, which is curiously effective in that, and the team do an excellent job, and I apologise for the chasing, but the wheel spin is somewhat minimal actually in terms of the way the team work. But so we haven't got gated technology, and one thing you can say is the BBC's open access, and the wonders of this model is once you're paid you can just get everything. But you're right to raise the concerns, by the way. I think this is a grade 1 issue for the board and everything, which is, are we offering people enough value? Not many people thought that in 21-22 we'd be taking more in receipt from the licence fee than the year before, which was good news. So that's the good news, and I think there's a lot of encouraging signs around. Close to 90% of the people in the UK are still using the BBC every week. Our overall metrics, and we're reviewing the annual report actually, and for the summer, if I may, Jubilee, Euros. I mean, I know we go through all the issues, but actually creatively and editorially, I think we're in really good form. Those numbers hold up. The reason I'm going there is it relates directly to usage, relates directly to payment, by the way. You've got to have people. The
graph is going the wrong way, is it not? That in as much as the evasion is increasing, and we don't know where it's going to go, and you must take measures to ensure that it doesn't get worse.
100%. And I think all we can do is make sure that we're running a highly efficient licence fee operation, and where evasion is, we're closing that off in the right way. Absolutely right. No, that's fair.
Including visits to my flat. I'd like to move on to local democracy reporters scheme. So recently, or comparatively recently, I gather the scheme was increased from 150 to 165 local democracy reporters. But there was a very critical evaluation of the scheme at Cairn Cross Review about the management. Do you think you need to alter or improve the management of the scheme in any way?
Well, we're all ears in terms of. I think overall it's been an incredibly successful scheme. By the way, I mean there's lots of debate, but to have those 165 reporters, I've met some of them, and actually, I think there were some things that we wanted to keep looking at. All right, which is this? And I've talked to the NMA, I've talked to others. Are we making sure we're supplying a broad range? So the answer to the question is, I think we can obviously keep improving. Yeah, but I see it in the context of success. By the way. Significant success in the democratic deficit of some of that reporting of council meetings, all the work that was going on. I think they've done a really good job. And if you talk to those reporters, I'm very proud of the work there the BBC have done. I think they're also supplying a lot of outlets. I think we're in good state. Now, I think what we need to do is keep doing the work we're doing. Which, in my view, and you might have different thoughts in terms of how we keep developing. One is to ensure that we keep the supply base wide. Because the rest of the market is quite consolidated, actually, outside the BBC. But I noticed, I looked at it. We've increased the number of LDR contracts from 68 to 118. The maximum size of each individual contract from 6 reporters to 3. So we've tried to atomise it a bit so that more people get served. The number of supplier organisations increased, because I know this is a concern for everyone, from 10 to 18. So the short answer to your question is, I think it's a very successful scheme. We need to keep working on it. You
did say in January that not every area of the BBC has protected status. Did you mean that perhaps this scheme is under review?
I'm a bit, not that I'm aware of as Director General, but I'm a big supporter of the scheme. I think it's excellent.
Okay, excellent. But it was also stated in the report that LDRS reporters are displacing existing reporters.
We haven't seen evidence of that, and if you've got specific evidence, I'm all ears, but we have not seen evidence of that. I'll just say that. So we have been acting.
That was part of the Cairn Cross Review.
No, I understand it. I'm just saying that I haven't. I asked the question because the simple point is we don't want that to take place. This is meant to be filling in gaps that weren't being served, and there was a democratic deficit. So if there's specific evidence of that happening now, we're all ears. What I do know is where I know is that widening the supply base and making sure that the local market is served across all the various companies, because the problem we've got is 83% of all local titles are controlled by 6 publishers. So it's quite centralised anyway. So that's where I focus. By the way, if there's evidence of factual evidence, there is concern about displacement, but I haven't seen.
If we find it, we'll pass it on to you. But
Thank you.
The other question, of course, is that as it's funded, it works like a franchise, I gather. So you fund it, but you use NewsQuest, whoever, Reach, whoever, to operate it. Does this drive down the wages in that sector?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we've looked at the wages. The original minimum salary, because you've got a minimum, was benchmarked against industry standards in 2018. And there's a minimum, but there's no maximum, and it's increased every year. So I think we just need to keep. There's no intent at all from our side apart from to be paying in line with market and have the right minimum. Again, I'll look at the data. If there's compelling data, at the moment I'm being told there's concern. There's always concern about the minimum pay, but it looks like we're in roughly the right place. I think, if I'm right, the current minimum salary outside London is 23,700. That's the minimum. So again, I'm all ears in terms of we just want to make the scheme work. But that's where I would say, by the way, this has got value to the BBC as well, because it's generated. I think there's 273,000 stories that wouldn't have been told. It's pretty impressive, of which we as the BBC can feed off that as well, and other, not just the commissioning organisations.
Very focused on local law.
Totally focused. And so I think I come into the spirit of, I'm all interested in feedback, co-working. I'm very supportive. It relates to the earlier challenge from another committee member around local. This is all part of the jigsaw, I think.
Thank you. Chair, if I may, just one more, because it occurred to me when we were talking about reorganisation of the BBC in general, and you'll be delighted to know I'm moving on to the performing arts side of things here, because in the days of Marmaduke Hussey and, and I think it was, I forget his name, was it Michael Checkland, who was the DG?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, way back.
They come, they go.
Absolutely. But we had the rehearsal rooms in Acton, the 7 stories with the cafeteria on top, and we had the donut with the executives at the top of the donut in Shepherd's Bush, and there was an enormous amount, and the words were just used just now, cross-fertilisation of the BBC in those days. You had writers, actors, directors, producers, all working together in those rehearsal rooms, and I, from personal experience, know that things were created out of that. Incredible. Now the BBC split and divided, and we all go off to village halls and rehearse. How do you ensure creative cross-fertilisation within the BBC?
Firstly, I recognise the challenge, actually, because I think that is how a lot of great creative work happens. And actually, one of the things we've seen in broadcasting house and all these hubs, they are, forgive the jargon, but multi-genre. So you've got there is a buzz in good BBC buildings editorially. And actually, if you go to Cardiff, if you go to others, you sense it, and live broadcasting is there. I think everyone feeds on each other. I still think if you go to the radio drama studio in New Broadcasting House, you go to other places, you get a bit of that buzz. I don't think things have disintegrated completely.
We haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
I don't think so.
Thank you. Very briefly. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Dr. Rupert Hook.
Thanks, Chair. My heart always swells with pride when I hear the word Acton. And I worked at the BBC when everyone was paid from Ealing. Villiers House was on all our pay slips in those days. So my first outing at this annual thing, so nice to meet the three of you. Tim Davie, I'm guessing there's no danger you will ever be on the ballot paper in Old Oak and College Park ever again.
There is no danger of that.
Good, because it's coming into my seat, so...
It was quite a few decades ago.
Yes, I know, it's the last century.
It tells you about the voodoo of this. I mean, it was quite a few decades ago, but yeah.
No, it was the last century for all of us, so that's
I'm glad others are active in that area. Thank you.
So yeah, really what I wanted to ask about is the talent bill, the on-air talent bill, and then I've got a little bit about the other stuff people have been talking about, what might be for the chop with this challenging financial, painful process that Richard Sharp described. So the wage bill for on-air talent this year is flat, isn't it? But the number of 150,000 plus people has gone up. How did that happen? Was that by cutting middle management or something?
Are you talking about on-air talent? Are you talking about
the published on-air talent?
You're talking on-air talent.
The figures we've got is that...
you're absolutely right. So overall about flat, the senior people's slightly up. We've had quite a lot, the answer to your question is, and that's just part of the overall, I mean, these numbers, I have to say, if we took everyone down to 150,000, and I know this is highly sensitive territory, that would save the BBC 5.1 million out of 3.787 billion. Just to be clear about, because these are in no way being flippant about it, because they're sensitive, it's important, we show restraint, but their numbers are quite small. In terms of, and those.
Oh, isn't that right?
Sorry.
The number
yes. Now I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you the quantum to start off with is about 5 million of spend. 100. If you took everyone down to 150, you're into quite a small number. And those top, I think it's about 74 talent deliver. They're in the programming that delivers about 40% of our impacts. By the way, they're actually from a purely ruthless kind of how do you get audiences. It's a very effective way in which we spend our money. Having said all that. We are trying to show as much restraint as possible. The answer to your question is, the market is as lively as it's ever been. I've been in this committee many times saying, well, Mr. Davie, you've got no market for news talent. I don't think we can quite say that at the moment. Global talent, and the other thing we've got is globally people are trying to poach talent. US salaries are going through the roof. So I think overall, and you've got inflation running pretty high. So I think overall we've done a pretty good job. I think we've seen that marginal increase in the top tier. We've restrained some of the very top salaries. It remains a sensitive subject. I think overall the record of the BBC over the last couple of years since I've got to grips with it is pretty good, actually.
I mean, there's another side of it as well, that people say that it's a poacher's charter, that if it's that transparent, then the opposition knows how much to pitch at to try and lure someone away.
Well, it certainly, there lies the joys of transparency. Yeah, I mean, it absolutely presents.
I know people who say
but it absolutely presents risks to us. We are in a very, very competitive market, and it is sensitive, but people really value great talent. And people who come to us, and I think we're doing outstanding in the world, by the way. There's all this noise around movement, this, that, and the other. Actually, we've had about 3% voluntary redundancy in terms of our presenters. So we've got an incredible base of talent. We've always been a place where you grow talent as well, by the way. And I think we should see, fresh talent coming through. Obviously, there's always noise when we refresh our lineup. So we've seen a bit of that. But overall, I think we're doing a good job in very tough circumstances, by the way.
So there has been a bit of an exodus. Emily Maitlis keeps popping up her name, and then also people that have gone to these right-wing channels with 0 viewers. I think there's a few of them around. Can you see why, to the public, we've mentioned that there's an almighty cost of living crisis, fuel crisis, whatever. It looks unjustifiable to have anyone on $500,000 a year in a public sector organisation. I mean, can we say that there will always be people who do that job? A few years ago with the One Show, didn't they have a clear out and they got people who are half price, and now they're household.
And I actually think we've got a good record of doing that. But there is a balance, and I think I absolutely know this is incredibly sensitive. I do think we're in a competitive situation that is different to, if I may, being in a government department or something. We are competing with a very, very live, direct competitors who want to poach our talent. We've kept the numbers fairly restrained. We're below inflation. I think we've done a good job. But I take your point. By the way, you can always make the argument, and it's valid, which is someone can present a programme. But we've just talked about earlier about presenters who have that connection. They are worth a lot. And if you're paying the money, you want things you value. So I think we've got the balance right. It's sensitive, it's difficult, and we're showing restraint.
So is the way it's going, if you do your Mystic Meg bit, that you'll have to fund inflation from this very tortured settlement that you've got? Is it going to be going downwards, do we see?
What, the pay bill?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that. I think that's the case, because I think we'll keep, I use the word we'll keep restraint, but we are in a market, and it's one of the bigger priorities for me. Keeping the best talent is right up there. And on a budget of, as I say, on a budget of 3.7 billion of public service income, this is and I don't want to be flippant about it in any way, shape or form, it's a relatively small amount of our budget. It's highly sensitive, quite rightly so. But I actually think investing in that talent is the right thing to do. So I would put that high up my priority list, because they're the people who have a connection with audiences, and they're the people want to spend time with in the morning, on the radio, on the television and others. I do take your challenge that we should be bringing new people through as well, by the way, definitely.
And when the gender pay gap, the disability and LGBTQ one's going down, is that not a bad look to the public?
You mean the pay gap's increasing?
Yeah, and I think there hasn't even been a report since the one that was 2019 and 2020 on gender pay. That's not happened.
No, our gender pay gap reporting is included in our annual report and accounts.
So there used to be a separate thing.
So we have the full gender pay gap reporting included and published in the annual report and accounts, and then an equality information report which is published online. So all that information continues
to be addressing the fact that these things look to be going backwards.
Well, we have seen changes in our pay gaps. Our pay gaps are relatively low, particularly when you compare it to the national average across all of the diverse characteristics, and if you compare it to our media competitors as well. And what happens when they get low, and when you're looking at small numbers, movements in and out will move those pay gaps up and down slightly, and we're seeing that across many industries as well. It doesn't mean at all that we are, complacent about it. I think we manage and monitor our pay gaps. They're part of our regular monthly reporting, and they are changing because we're seeing different characteristics coming in at different layers in the organisation. So as we drive more to create greater diversity across the BBC, so we've talked a lot about 50-20-12, as we progress and move towards those numbers, what we are seeing is we're bringing greater numbers of diversity into the more junior levels of the organisation to particularly increase talent and invest in that future talent pipeline. We could do more to bring in more diversity at senior levels, and that would also help us on our
I'm just having a flashback to when Blue Peter presenter Connie Huck was being paid less than her male compatriots turn of the century, so I'm hoping it is being addressed because I think she was. Well, anyway,
I think there's the earlier question about equal pay.
Yes, but true. There are two different things. As any trade union
it's really important. This is really important. We don't
anyway.
with respect. That's why I bite, because you can't equal pay is non-negotiable, legal, and we're not.
Yeah, but it's been going on for a while in your organisation. Yeah, it has happened.
Well, to be fair, I just want to be clear that the numbers we gave you earlier, and we're watching them. We have driven that down to, there's always an organisation of 20,000 people. We're at a handful of cases now. One case is too many, but you get my point. I think we have done a good job on that, by the way, and that's thanks to work before me as well on equal pay. On the pay gap, we are better than the media industry by a mile, better than the national but I'm going to say something slightly contentious, which is it's not just about the gender pay gap, it's about what's actually happening within that, in terms of what you don't want to do is restrict yourself from bringing junior people in, driving talent in the organisation, just by solely looking at that metric. So it's really important, we can share this, is looking by level what's happening. Our overall diversity numbers, by the way, are moving in the right direction.
At the boardroom level as well?
I mean, you can talk to the board, but yes is the answer.
And then my cousins in Bangladesh used to always say to me that they listen to the BBC when they want to hear the truth. Do we have any assurances from this new Prime Minister, who as Foreign Secretary was a cheerleader for the World Service? Is that going to be protected? Have we got clarification?
Before the last licence settlement, a conversation I had with the Secretary of State was that if it was flat, it was going to put extreme pressure on the funding of the World Service from the BBC licence fee payers. Specifically, our duty, as we've discussed here, to provide a valued service to domestic households, and to have them pay for content that they may not be consuming themselves is going to be extraordinarily challenging, particularly given the amount involved, $250 million or so coming from licence fee payers. So that is a serious issue that I look forward to discussing with whoever the new Secretary of State is, and potentially with the government, because there is jeopardy now where there wasn't before.
Because again, your international reporting from Kyiv.
I understand, and it's a tremendous asset for the UK. It's a tremendous success story for the BBC. It's more valuable now than ever. But there are these very difficult financial issues that have been created by the last settlement.
And lastly, with the Young Audience Content Fund gone, I think the BBC is one of the, Damien Green touched on it, last sort of British international standard producers of children's programmes. And all our childhood, we remember Why Don't You and Blue Peter and all those things, Doctor Who, which is a crossover. Is it really the right thing to put CBBC online only in the next 3 years? We've all, as constituency MPs, seen throughout the lockdown, not every family has a plethora of devices, whereas everyone has a TV set with a whatever cathode ray. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we need to tread cautiously. I mean, having said that, anyone with children of that age know that consumption of there's no closure of CBBC. We'll have CBBC. It's just a question of whether you're paying for linear broadcast distribution and the numbers you're getting on that. So all the programming needs to be protected. Newsround, is doing 3.3 million a week, by the way, but not on the, way beyond the channel.
I mean, we can cite examples of people, they don't have a lot of the, do you know what I mean? That the kiddies
absolutely
get
and I think this one of the great challenges for us is paying for the online distribution. But you've also got all the broadcast legacy. I mean, welcome to the world of transitioning, and I think we need to be careful about how we do that. So
BBC4 as well, is that right? Because it seems with BBC3 you went the other way.
Well, we're not. We're a little bit shameless on this. What I mean by that is we just want to get to the audience, and at the moment, the audience there's a benefit in having the BBC3 shop window in linear, but the numbers for that particular age group, by the way, on linear television is extremely small. So we just have to be led by the data. We want to protect children's output. There's no scenario in which the BBC isn't offering CBBC, a full service, all of that. The question is just distribution.
Okay, the Koonsberg thing, I think, get better opening titles. I used to like the on-the-record ones. Snarly dinosaur. Bring that back.
I will pass that on along with lots of other added value I have had over the last day or two. Thank you.
Okay, Jane Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to turn to sports coverage and where the BBC's direction of sports coverage. I think lots of my constituents do have concerns about the licence fee, and they feel when they see some presenters' salaries that does cause an issue. But I think for those big national moments of sport, I think the BBC's always had a place, and the Euros women's football final this year was one of those great national moments that 17.4 million people tuned in to watch the final. How is women's football? I know you have a deal with to show coverage until 2024 with Sky showing some matches and the BBC showing some matches. Where's women's football going to fit into your scheduling over the next?
Well, it's central. I think I'm really proud of this summer, actually, I have to say, and I know for the Midlands as well, the Commonwealth Games. Yeah. Boy, if you wanted cheering up, go a visit to the Commonwealth Games and a visit to the Euros was an anecdote to a lot of woes, but I thought it was sensational. It's also critical to the BBC, value ascribed to the licence fee, but also I think the sports bodies see the idea of having, and thank you for the listed events, because now we have the Euro finals and the Women's World Cup finals as listed events. That's critical, by the way. By the way, I would say, and I know all the broadcasters feel this, that not including digital rights in that, or some degree of digital rights, is a problem, because one thing we do know is, so if you're asking me where our plans are, we want to make sure that our rights, we can get digital rights, because otherwise you literally are just sitting on a linear island and you haven't got enough. With regard to women's, by the way, I think we continue to have the investment with Sky as a partner. They're a great partner. That works. We've got the competitions. I wish Wales a really good match against. I think they're playing Slovenia tonight, aren't they? There you go. So we're hoping for a win against Slovenia, so we get that through, and I'm sure Mr. Brennan will be cheering them on. So that's good. And then on Scotland, we've done a deal to show 26 live. Scottish Women's Premier League games, which I know is a question. Previously, I think I was being at a different committee being asked about that. So look, the short answer is we spend a limited amount of money on sports rights versus some of the behemoths that are now coming into the market, Amazon, others, that are huge companies with massive budgets. But thanks to the efforts of the listed, two things I think, the listed events construct, which is so critical and needs to keep fresh, and this committee has an enormous part to play in that. And the second thing is the fact that sports bodies know that doing the kind of things we've talked about are really, really good for their sports. Think about cricket and what we've done with the 100. So the short answer is we're in good shape, actually. I think we're fighting a good fight based on very limited funds, but we need the regulatory support.
And do you think is the BBC going to sort of lead or follow on women's football? Are people sort of, I'm from Wolverhampton.
Boy, have we led! Boy, have we led! I mean, I tell you what, we were there putting it on mainstream BBC One, and I had a few people going, "Are you sure?" And we were sure, and we'll continue with that.
Are you getting grumblings from? I've been a football fan since I left the cradle, practically. Are you getting pushback on are you cutting the amount of men's football and?
Not anymore. No. I actually think it was a revelation this summer, and I think actually we were vindicated for our editorial decisions. We get a hard time for when we take risks and get them wrong. I think we didn't feel it was a risk. Actually, we thought the quality of the game, the professionalism of the game, the punditry, first class. We're there. We want to lead. The only question will be budgetary, and making sure there's no lack of intent. It'll be about money, and also.
Isn't it useful to have women's football is currently, I would imagine, significantly cheaper than.
It's critical.
Than men's
it's
rights.
Critical. We couldn't be more. We couldn't be more there, basically.
Okay. I agree with you about the Commonwealth Games. It was fantastic for the West Midlands, and I'd be remiss not to mention it. Is the BBC too football focused?
I don't think so. No.
Do you feel your role in sort of the health of the nation and educating the nation, does that take in more niche sort of grassroots sports? And I remember I'm trying to get Wolverhampton as a kabaddi centre for the UK, and lots of people say, I used to watch that on Channel 4, you know, get back from the pub, watch it. So do you feel we're not making the most of those opportunities of other sports to get more people involved in?
I mean, to be fair to us, I think we do more than anyone. I mean, you take the Commonwealth Games, where we have those moments where people come into different sports, or curling at the Olympics, all of that, and those talking to those sports bodies, that's actually critical. There are limits to our, I mean, I'm going to say the obvious, which is there's limits to our budget in terms of how much we can do and the airtime we can provide, because it's not just about the rights on that. Often the rights are more achievable for us, but then you've got to film them, curate them, do them with the right quality. Having said that, I think there are some opportunities with digital technology. I've been talking to the sports team about this, and live streams and the iPlayer, where we can begin to think about offering more streams and partner with more sports bodies. So I'm interested in that. I think it's a fair challenge. I think we start at the top of the class, but we might have work to do.
Okay, thank you. And what are the crown jewel sporting events? Is women's football now firmly going to be included in that sort of ongoing programme of things we all tune in for?
Hopefully.
Absolutely. I think I'm probably going to leave it there. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair, and happy centenary to you all. I suppose what I'm interested in is, you know, in the broader picture, what all this means in relation, you know, the budget problems, they are problems as well as challenges, whatever you want to call them, that you have, the kind of structural changes that are going on within the BBC, and that point you were talking about at the beginning about, you know, whether or not all of this, including the commercial pressures, undermine the essential values of the organisation as it, you know, enters its second century. And you know, as a strong supporter of public service broadcasting, the idea of it, and public service media, I am concerned, I think, by some of these trends, and I just want to explore that in a few questions, and some of the decisions and whether they will prove, you know, to be the right decisions. I mean, it's very interesting now that, you know, BBC Three has been brought back on to linear, which is a service principally aimed at young people who we are told don't watch linear. Yeah. And BBC Four is being taken off of linear, which is a service we know is predominantly watched by older audiences, who are the very people who watch linear. And you've told us a process that's going on in the news channel, when other news channels are emerging on our broadcast landscape, you know, and to what extent will the BBC find that some of those competitors will, you know, fill some of the gap with their content, which we know doesn't meet the same standards, in my view, that BBC news coverage does in terms of impartiality and the things we've been talking about. And then we talked about children's television and, you know, what's going on there, and BBC Studios. I mean, to what extent is BBC Studios being used as a way of actually simply hiding the pay that talent's getting paid, since you don't have to declare their salaries? They're still being funded by the licence fee payer, by the way, which is the principle behind why those salaries, those high salaries, were made public. But by outsourcing them into BBC Studios, etc., you are avoiding transparency and scrutiny. And will you be, I mean, I won't go on too long, but you see the picture I'm trying to paint. I'm concerned that some of the direction of travel, understanding all the commercial pressures and the technological changes that are going on, could down the line affect the values of the BBC and ultimately undermine, therefore, its case as a public service broadcaster. What would your reaction be to that, Tim, Richard, or Lee?
Do you want to start, Richard?
Yeah, look, I mean, we have to start with values. The world is full of commercial media organisations, and the BBC could be a commercial organisation. The question is, as if it were a commercial organisation, would it be fulfilling its public service remit? And the values of the private sector overlap, but they are different in aggregate than the values of a public service organisation. delivering many of the, not just the services, but also taking the kind of risks we've just talking about, for example, in women's sports, that are incredibly important for society. So we are conducting a strategic review because we are having to see how we can fulfill our remit and succeed, which is the value proposition, not just the values, but the value proposition where you're then consumed and consumed. And clearly at the heart of that is forward-looking thinking about digital, forward thinking about delivery to where people are. So it's not so much that TikTok is a competitor, it is for time, but we can be present there. So that we can be consumed through TikTok, we can be consumed through different platforms. Localism. I mean, one of the great things, certainly that I've discovered since I joined the BBC, which is gratifying the context, the discussion we've had here, is how important and significant our local content is. Not just that we produce it, but it's actually to the consumers. It's one of the most valued things that we do. So that fits very neatly with our public service remit.
Okay.
So in conducting this review, we're going to address those issues. And at the same time, the industry itself is challenged domestically. If you only have to look as a litmus test, the share price of ITV, which is roughly at a 52-week low, and probably a fifth of where it would have been, a quarter to a fifth of where it would have been 10 years ago. It's it's a £2.5 billion market cap for the entire infrastructure system. That shows that the commercial sector is under significant pressure. We've got Channel 4 subject to potential change as well. And yet this is for creative industry, where the BBC is the wellspring of that as another important feature of what we do, which is in growth value added larger than aerospace, defence, life sciences combined in terms of growth value added to the UK. So,
can I just
this
on that point about
yes.
growth value added and the importance of the BBC to the creative industries, which I completely accept. But one of my concerns is that potentially through this, outsourcing process, if I can call it that, that what the special thing the BBC has always brought, if you like, is the ability of creatives to maintain their IP, to get well treated and properly treated by an organisation that respects creative people and their intellectual property. And yet the BBC recently conducted a new content deal with Moonbug, which I'm sure you're aware of, which includes the relicense of new episodes. It's in children's television area, isn't it? Of a number of programmes. I must confess I haven't seen them, but it includes new IPs to the BBC, such as Blippy Wonders, Little Baby Bum, Gecko's Garage and Lily Bob's City Farm, which will be available on BBC iPlayer. Gecko's Garage will also be available on CBeebies, the free-to-air preschool children's channel. But this is a company that is highly controversial in the way that it negotiates with composers and who provide the music for these programs, because it aggressively pursues buyouts of their. Now, you wouldn't do that directly as the BBC. If you're commissioning a piece of music, you wouldn't attempt to pickpocket, if you like, the creator's IP. But these companies that you're now dealing with arm's length, they are not operating, this is my point, in the values that the BBC has operated in, and which has made the significant contribution to the creative industry in this country. What's your response to that?
Well, my response is we've always been in the market where we've sourced in outside news and sport. We've sourced in-house and out of house, and that balance was, remember the window of creative competition and the 25% ring fence on indies. Nothing. I mean, if you look at actually our supply side, it's not radically changing. What you're trying to do is underpin your in-house strength in studios, by the way. But I do, for what it's worth, I don't think the move to studios in any way, shape, or form driven by trying to cover up salaries. That's the last thing in my mind there. What's in my mind is protecting talent and keeping people who want to develop creative ideas in the BBC, because there's just so many opportunities for them. And if you've got a drama project and you're stuck in the BBC in-house in public service, you could not sell it to anyone else. You left and formed an independent company, and guess what? A lot of value was lost, and a lot of those companies went to Americans, etc. So that's why we're trying to do it. In terms of the IP construct, I mean, we deal with. I mean, I'm going to sound kind of technical on it, but we deal with outside entities. I don't think it's for us to judge that they need to run their businesses legally and within the boundaries of anything that's been agreed with PAGD and the rights and the IP. We as the BBC, I think, act fairly and rightly in terms of, certainly versus some others.
You have a specific policy about the commissioning of music as an organisation?
What do you mean a specific policy?
A specific policy about the manner in which these negotiations
I don't know, actually. I don't know.
Because it's an increasing trend, as you're probably aware.
I can look. I'd have to take it away and look at
their IP.
In some ways,
Michaela Cole did, do not destroy.
I suspect
specifically came to the BBC because it did defend people's rights to hold their IP, whereas Netflix wouldn't.
But Mr. Red, that was exactly my point, which is the BBC will deal with people without having to capture all the rights. Having said that, there's so much value now. There's so much value extracted on things like the iPlayer over time that the old way in which we just got a small window and then it floated off to Netflix in the UK, we had to close. We're not doing that anymore, but we are certainly much more porous in terms of our ability to share rights. I mean, that Michaela Cole example is a fantastic example where we didn't demand all the rights, and also we offer a bit more creative freedom sometimes. We're not driven by algorithm, we're driven by great editors, etc., etc. But I'd have to come back into. I think we're just playing with.
Will you find out?
I need to understand. If I'm being blunt, I need to understand the question a little bit more.
Well, in terms of, I'd like to know what the BBC's policy is specifically when it commissions music in relation to IP, and also whether it has any kind of, in standards in relation to who it's commissioning outside organisations of what their approach is towards
to IP approach. Okay, we'll come back. We'll give you a note on that. No problem.
People, I'd be really interested to know that. And on the point about I think I was trying to find the quote, but I couldn't find it. I think specifically that it has been said somewhere that this does give the BBC the advantage when it moves programmes into studios of not having to declare those talent figures. And all I'm saying is that the more that happens, the more it's likely to generate the original concern that existed about lack of transparency. And I know the BBC was very, very reluctant to reveal these talent figures. And if it becomes the case that almost all programming where these salaries are paid is, if you like, locked away in a dark cupboard so we can't see the facts, then that will generate future concerns, and I'm just flagging that to you as an issue.
I think also where licence fee payers' money is used to pay salaries, it is fully disclosable.
Yes, I know, but the problem is this is being avoided by that because the licence fee payer money is indirectly paying the salary rather than directly.
So in the commercial environment, which is not using the licence fee payers' money at all to pay those salaries, and on an even footing with other commercial organisations, it would be commercially detrimental to expose those salaries in the current climate that we've got when licence fee payer money is not being used to pay.
But the more that you go to this model where programmes are being commissioned in this way, then by definition, the fewer of those salaries which are being paid for indirectly when the programme is commissioned and paid for by the licence fee, there'll be less disclosure of those salaries, and the licence fee payer should be entitled to know where their money's going. And it won't make any difference to the viewer whether Gary Lineker is being paid directly by the BBC or being paid by Match of the Day Productions Limited. Ultimately, that's my point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And finally, I have one last question. The inference of a lot of what you've said today is that basically you need people watching your programmes or listening to the radio. That's right, isn't it?
That's the basics of the job, yeah.
So why have you cancelled the Steve Wright in the Afternoon programme on Radio 2, which I'm a big fan of. If I do have a day off work, I like to listen to it, when it is hugely popular, has huge listening numbers, to be replaced by what? Because your record on getting and changing radio programmes has not been great in recent years. Why is that decision being made?
Because I think it's absolutely appropriate to refresh the schedule at the right points. And we judge it to be that we're editors, and we judge it to be the right point. Steve's a legend. He's done a brilliant job. We've got an amazing lineup at Radio 2. We've had changes, to your point, that have worked. Others that have been forced on us. But I employ people to refresh the network. Scott Mill's an outstanding, I think, broadcaster actually, world class.
If go down, are you happy with that?
It depends on its market performance versus the rest of linear radio how it's doing versus and how distinctive it is. It's not just simply on the number. It's not as binary as if the number goes down a bit. It's Radio 2's position, what's its playlists are, is it valued by its audience. The connection that a broadcaster has with its audience is critical, as per our earlier conversation. By the way, these things are not easy, and I recognise that, and I think we're in no way trying to lurch to youth or just do things that are stupid.
Will you be happy if the numbers go down, the listening numbers?
I always like to see a good performance on our radio stations. I'll just leave it at that.
I shall come back to it. Anyway, can I say thank you very much. You've answered a very wide range of questions this morning, and we look forward very much to receiving the information on the various issues that you've agreed to send to us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session, whenever that is. So thank you very much. Order.
Thank you. Thank you.